This is a production of Cornell University.
Now in its fourth edition, Miller's Anatomy of the Dog, co-authored by Dr. Howard Evans and Dr. Alexander de la Junta, is an unparalleled reference resource on canine morphology. Elaborate full-color illustrations and detailed descriptions make the text's intricate structures easy to see and understand. In a book talk at Mann Library in November 2012, Dr. Evans highlights the features distinctive to the new edition and reflects on the steps involved in updating this classic work.
Our guest author's new book, Miller's Anatomy of the Dog, is available for purchase in the back if you're interested in buying a copy, and it will also be for sale at the campus store if you forgot your wallet. Also, if you'd like to get your name on our list to get notifications of the book talks, there's a clipboard somewhere in the back. See if some... It's by the table, thank you. So you can put your name down if you'd like to be on our mailing list. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Howard Evans is Professor Emeritus of Veterinary and Comparative Anatomy in the Department of Biomedical Sciences in the College of Veterinary Medicine. During his 36-year tenure at Cornell prior to his retirement in 1986, Dr. Evans taught courses including dog anatomy, horse and cow anatomy, the anatomy of fish and birds, and natural history. Howard was an undergraduate at Cornell in entomology, and at that time he was called to active duty in the Army during World War II. And upon completion of 3 years of service and graduation from Cornell in absentia, impressive, he returned as a graduate teaching assistant in zoology. He received a PhD in 1950, and that same year he was hired as an assistant professor in the veterinary college. Dr. Evans was chair of veterinary anatomy for 10 years and was also on the Cornell Board of Trustees. And also, he and his wife Erica, who's here today, have led many Cornell University trips to places such as Africa, Hawaii, New Guinea, and Antarctica. So we're pleased to have Dr. Evans here today to talk about his book.
A lot of historic people here also. I can see people from all over. My wife Erica ought to be the co-author of this book, but she's put up with it for many years. Yeah, this is one of the happy occasions compared to other times. I thought I put slides in because if I didn't put slides in, I would never know what to talk about in what sequence. This way it gives me a framework, and I hope I can stay on time. This is a very historic picture, and this was taken in the Gross Anatomy Laboratory of James Law Hall, which no longer exists. The INLR school built a new building there, the one that looks like a fortress along the road. And this is a palpation dog. It was a dog that used for blood transfusions, and we used to bring it in along with some other dogs so that students could palpate what they were going to dissect. So he's holding a specimen here with muscles on it, and this greyhound is just used for palpation. So every time we had a new lab starting that would consider muscles, we'd have a live animal there so people could learn where these structures are. And that's Dr. Miller. Now, Dr. Miller's daughter is here today, Sharon. Dr. Miller was the one who hired me in 1950. He graduated from the vet school here in Ithaca, and he was chairman of anatomy. And this is historic for another reason. This man here is a Swiss veterinarian who had just graduated that year. This was 1951. And I remember when Herman came, he was really gung-ho, you know. He liked everything in a hurry. Like he'd pull up to a gas station, he'd go back and forth over the ringer, you know, that tube that comes out, and the garage man would come out and think he's crazy because he was in a hurry. He didn't want to waste any time. But he had a very interesting career and was a very good teacher. Now, let's see, where do I control this thing? Is that the thing I have in my pocket? right there. Okay. Now, this woman has to get a lot of credit. This is Marion Newson. She was the artist who did all these drawings, and I've brought along some of her original drawings. And these are very historic things now, because the new book didn't use these they used the drawings, but they didn't use any of the lettering, because the lettering was done with a Leroy set. And a Leroy is like a stencil. You put a little guide in the hole and you run it around. So each letter is made individually. It's a real tedious process, and no publisher wants that because they want to be able to change the names. And so all of these labels had to be wiped off, and all the lead lines wiped off, and then they would be sent back to us. I didn't know that would happen. When they said they were going to color the book, I thought, gee, that's beautiful. It'll look good. I didn't know that everything would be wiped off, and I'd be asked if each line goes to the right thing. So it turned out to be worse than the first time we did it. But, and I think we've caught all the mistakes, but I wouldn't be sure of that either. So I have two drawings here that show that. Marion was a nurse in the First World War in the North African campaign. Oh, I mean Second World War, right. And she was born and lived on Prince Edward Island. And when we needed an artist, because the one we had decided to go to medical school, Pat Barrow went to med school, and we then looked in various magazines who was wanting to be an artist. We wanted a medical illustrator. Now, the reason it's so important is you can't use photographs in an anatomy book. If you make photographs, it's okay for some structures, bones in particular. But as soon as you want other things, photographs show too much. So you need somebody that's going to pick out what it is you want to see. And Marion was particularly good at this. In this particular case, she's doing illustrations of the ear of the dog. And these have never been done by anybody else. These illustrations are just superb. She worked for us for her entire career. And, when she first applied for this job, she sent in pictures of bananas and apples and a couple of bottles and glasses. And then hidden among all these drawings from art school at Massachusetts General Hospital was one kidney. And on the basis of that one kidney, we hired her. So I was awful glad there was an organ included. And Marion drew these pictures for us for years. Now this represents the carnivores. To give you an idea of the relationships between cats and dogs, this is the cat side here. These are cats, and everything else here is dog. And they started out a long time ago like that. The cats and the dogs split up in early times. And some of them, like hyenas, are almost, some cats are dog-like. The hyena is very dog-like. And of course, I put the dog here and then said dogs and wolves, because usually people say wolves and the dog came from the wolf. Well, the wolf came from the dog maybe, and I like to think of it like that. They're very closely related. All dogs interbreed with wolves. All coyotes and wolves and dogs interbreed. And there are other dog-like animals that interbreed. So the mixtures are fantastic. Now, when it comes to naming breeds of dogs, there are conventions, and the American Kennel Club has its conventions, and the British Club has different conventions. So they group them differently. They put dogs in different groupings. And this just happens to be from one page in the AKC book to show you dogs that are considered similar. As we say, they're all interbreed. And as soon as they interbreed, of course, you get a mixture of characters. Now, in the Cornell Med School in 1937, a doctor by the name of Stockard started to breed dogs and cross them. And he crossed Chihuahuas with Great Danes, artificially, of course. And the results that he got were very interesting. He followed them through the F1 and the F2 generations, and you could see what happened as they back-crossed. So today, if any dog, if you test the DNA of a dog, you can tell who its ancestors were, and most dogs come from 3 or 4 breeds. Some can come from as many as 7, and some for as few as 2. So they're studying dogs now in African villages to see if the African village dog has a hereditary background that is tied up with England, which it isn't. And it's very interesting what's turning out. They're now studying dog genomics in a way that we never could before. And we're learning things we never knew before. This is a drawing that shows what, in the old days, they tried to make some color illustrations out of our black and whites. And in this case, these are 2 overlays that I just laid on here. They would use an overlay for the blue and an overlay for the red, and sometimes they weren't exactly in correlation, you know. And as a result, when you print these pictures, you had to throw those away. So many plates had to be thrown away when they printed them. Nowadays, they can take a black and white, and they can take a color illustration. They can print it in all colors at once. So this is an example of this illustration. Now, all of the labels have been changed because these are labels that can be used on a computer. You can type them in. These are Leroy labels. They all had to be taken off, and the dotted lines were taken off. They liked solid lines. And then they would send them back to us. Sandy Delahunt and I did this 4th edition. And when they'd send them back, we would have to look at each label to see if the line went to the right place and if it had the right name. And unfortunately, on almost every drawing, we found something. Sometimes 7 things were not right. It's very hard sometimes to tell where the line stopped. You know, it may stop on a nerve or an artery. And the people who are doing this in the office down there in Missouri, it's all done by computer. I never met these people down in Missouri. And sometimes, this is the way we were getting the illustrations back, and we'd make little notations on them about what was wrong, you know, what to do. Like here was a case where they had the aorta colored in blue, as if it was a vein. Well, if you're not careful, you know, that would slip through. And then we'd get a letter from somebody. So those are the kinds of things you have to catch, and we had hundreds of these. Now, some things can be done like a photographic plate. This is a slice of a dog brain. It happens to be a beagle that came from Clive McKay. Clive McKay was studying nutrition in dogs, and he was ranting against Coca-Cola. So I got a lot of these Coca-Cola fed dogs to start my breeding colony, and they worked very well. I bred he gave me 20 dogs, and I built a colony of dogs to study beagles. I knew their histories, and I knew their breeding records. And we used to let them go on campus every day. The man who'd taken care of them would take them out of the cages and clean the cages, and he'd let them go. And they'd run off on campus as a pack, and then they would come back when they heard certain chimes. They got used to when to come back because they had to be lifted into their cages, a lot of them. And it was really interesting to have this pack running around. That went on for years until one was hit by a car on campus. And Dean Hagen was called and told that one of our dogs was hit by a car. And when they checked on it, they found out that these dogs are set free every day. And when they asked me, I said, yeah, they have the run of the campus. And, well, that was the end of that. So anyhow, this is a slice of a brain, and the brain slice is mounted on a glass plate and covered with a glass slip and then photographed. So you can use it like a negative, just like a negative of a photograph. This is an actual slice of a beagle brain. And then the labels were put on, and they put all the labels in by computer. Oh, did I go too far here? Yeah, this is an interesting thing. That Herman Meyer that we saw in the beginning, when he came, he showed us a technique for freezing the brain. That's a brain in the normal contours. And this one here has been frozen and then scraped out with a stick, a little orange stick, the kind you'd use to work on your nails. And as a result, you can wipe off all the cell bodies, and what it does, it leaves the fiber tracts behind, all the nerve cell stem. So by wiping off the cells, you can then see where the white matter is going. You can follow the path. And we did this to a lot of brains, in different aspects. And his technique was very good. Now, one thing I like about this new edition of the book, they were able to take my old Kodachromes. These are Kodachromes I took of the dogs I was operating on to remove the fetuses. These are live dogs that went through several operations, and after 3 or 4, I would give them away as pets, and they made very good pets. But they survived very well after being exteriorized, and I would remove the embryos from one side. So this is a 5-day interval between this side and this side. So you take the pups out, the uterus shrinks up pretty quickly, and the others aren't bothered. And in this way, I could get the age. I knew the age of the pups by 5 days difference. I didn't know exactly. When you breed a dog, you can't tell when the sperm and the egg will meet because the sperm lives about 7 days, and well, the egg and the sperm both live quite a while. And as a result, you can't count from the first breeding how old the dog's going to be. You can miss it easily. But when you do this, and I did this to a number of dogs, bred them and opened them up at 5-day intervals, I knew they were 5 days apart. So that's how we established the ages of some of these. Now, this is a placenta of a beagle. So you can see the yolk sac here in there. And this is the actual placenta where the blood exchange takes place. And I've rolled it out of the uterus. So I've opened up the uterus and rolled it out and then preserved it. And then I injected the vessels with latex. That's why it's red here. And you can see where the vessels go, and then you can clear them and see exactly where the vessels are. And eventually, I stained them with alizarin red, so all of the bones were stained red. And I could stain the cartilages with blue, and in that way I could see the bone and cartilage of the different ages of the dog. And that's what's in this, that was in the 3rd edition also. So that's a very valuable thing. There's no other book that has aged dog embryos done like this. Well, when it comes to teeth, they're doing a lot more with teeth now than they did before. It's very sophisticated, and they have systems for naming the teeth. And I've used 2 systems here that dentists use so that you can name the teeth exactly, and people know what you're talking about. As far as the names go, of all structures, every anatomical structure has a name. In fact, there are about 5,000 names for every 1,000 structures. And the reason for that is people didn't know somebody else named it, and they would give it another name, or it could be named in another country. Every country has their own names. And as a result, for years, they were trying to get together and standardize the names. And I came to veterinary anatomy just at the time when we were having meetings all over Europe by a society that had a committee, a nomenclature committee, trying to decide on which names to use. It wasn't easy because we were often outvoted. And it was tough, in fact, to drop a name that you knew real well. But we managed to go through that. Now we have these in books, and it's also on the web. So nobody can say they can't afford this $90 book of names. You just have to call it up on the web, and it's free. And if you want to have it right, eventually everybody will want to have it right. We're not at that stage completely yet. There are people who like certain names, and they say, that's the name I'm going to use until I die. Okay. Eventually they'll die, and we'll have the name. So you can look them up, and anybody can see this on the web. You call up the NAV, Nomina Anatomica Veterinaria. And some of these drawings have lots of labels. You can see here for the eye. And that's what Marion was so good at. Marion made these drawings. And she made them sitting at the desk there, and sometimes with a hand lens to see what she was doing. And most of the drawings that she made were made with a brush. She liked the brush dipped in India ink with a point on it. You know, we once had an artist who used to wipe the brush on her shoulder all the time, and the laundry never could get over that. But Marion had a very good technique. Well, that's what happens when you go back and forth between the company and Missouri. Elsevier Press, by the way, is the one that did this. And these are some of the illustrations going back and forth. Now, the Koreans, well, this is the English here. The dissection of the dog, we tried this system of coloring drawings on the guide first. This is a guide to dissection of the dog before we used it in the big book. And it worked very well. Dr. Delahunty was a student of mine in 1954, 55. He was a student from New Hampshire. And being from out of state, he was refused 3 times, turned down. And he ended up being the top graduate in the college. And we turned him down 3 times. So those were the days when out-of-staters had a tough time. That's Dr. Delahunty there. I dedicated this 4th edition to him. It's the one thing he didn't know was happening. You see, we shared every picture that was going into this book, and we sent them back and forth, and he knew exactly what was happening, and sometimes it was hard to decide what to do. And then I sent this to the editor, and I said, if you could use this. This was the year he retired. He retired at the age of retirement, and and he lives in New Hampshire, and he's as sharp as ever. He's right now he's redoing his neurology book, but he didn't see this picture, and it happened that when he opened the book, he just happened to open up to this page, the one picture he'd never seen in the whole book, and that shocked him so that he called me on the phone. Now the Koreans, they used the same pictures, they just changed the language, and it's a very good way to learn Korean, I guess. Because what they've done in each case here, they've put the name in Korean and in English, or in some cases we've used Latinized terms. So this is a very handy thing to do. And they did a good job. And they put it on better paper. They used a heavier paper. When you publish these books, the heavier the paper, the clearer the colors look, and there's no bleeding through from one page to another. But U.S. Squeezes it too hard, and I must say the Koreans did a better job at the color plates, and so did the Portuguese. In Brazil, the book is in Portuguese, that's their language, and they printed also on a heavier paper. The disadvantages of a heavier paper makes the book heavier. The book company told us they want to make the book lighter. Well, I say make the muscles stronger. And so that leaves me time to talk about some other things here, or answer questions. That would be the other thing I could do, or introduce some people. Like I like to introduce Dean Popenzik, who was the dean of the veterinary college. Dean Popenzik, would you raise your hand or stand up? Thank you. Yeah, George Popenzik was dean for 15 years. The dean before him was Dean Hagen. I came over when Hagen was dean, and Dean Hagen served for 25 years. In the old days, deans served a lot longer. And so I had a very, very good tenure with Dr. Popenzik. This was the third edition. You know, they used cloth covering. So the third edition is a very good one, but black and white, and you can see places where it could really stand color because you can't tell the difference with what's being shown. Oh, I just love the color editions that we have now. If somebody has a question, I'd be glad to diverge. Yes.
Was there a first edition of Miller's Anatomy that you weren't involved with, or have you always been involved with it right from the start?
Oh, that's a good question. When I came to the college, Dr. Miller hired me because I was teaching comparative anatomy to his assistant, to his teaching assistant. And the vet college put up funds, or the state did, for another position. And Miller asked his assistant, George Christensen, do you know anybody who's teaching anatomy who could take this position because it's one of those things where they'd like to fill it as quickly as possible, which was fortunate for me. And so George Christensen suggested me, and I went over to visit Miller. I must say, I'd never been in a veterinary college before. You know, that's the way it is on campus. A lot of people have never gone into another building, just the building they work in. And I've made a point of going out of my way to visit buildings all over. So this was a very good beginning because I saw things in the college, veterinary college, that I never knew existed. And sure enough, Dr. Miller hired me as an assistant professor in the veterinary college, and that started my career. George Christensen went on to become dean of the out in Iowa of the veterinary college, just at the time he was going to help get this book together. Because when Miller died, Miller had been working on this book for about 10 years, and the dean had hired an artist to do drawings for him. So that was very good because he would do the dissections, and the artist and students helped, and then the artist would make the drawings. And that's the way it grew. So there were about 10 years of accumulations of drawings when I came. And Christensen was supposed to help with that first edition. Unfortunately, he got hired. That was fortunate for him. He got hired in Iowa. He went to Purdue first. When he went to Purdue, it was a new veterinary college at that time. And Purdue asked George, how many anatomists do you need? He said, well, we need 9. Oh, 9, that's astronomical. You know, even Cornell didn't have 9 anatomists. And, but somehow they agreed with him, and he had the biggest department of anatomy in the whole country at that time. And here he had just taken over this new school job. So we ended up, the book slowed down because we just weren't able to work on it the way we had planned. And it took 3 years before the book came out. So the book came out. Dr. Miller died. Oh, Dr. Miller had epilepsy, and it got worse over the years. And he had several operations, and they found out at the final operation that he had an astrocytoma that had spread through the brain, and nothing could be done about it. It was really very sad. And so when he retired, or he died in 1960, and this book didn't come out until 63. It took us 3 years to get it together, but he had extensive notes and all these drawings. I mean, the drawings take years to do. What? Oh, okay. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, Mrs. Miller, when Dr. Miller died, Mrs. Miller asked me, she keeps me straight. Yeah, Mrs. Miller asked me if I would finish the book up for her. And Dr. Christensen, being his student, his graduate student, she asked if he could be included as an author. So I took him on, and that's the way our relationship started. Unfortunately, he got tied up and wasn't able to do anything. And I put his name on the second edition, although he never saw it. And then the company gave me the business, you know. Book companies don't like it when you put somebody who's not involved on the masthead. But I was doing it sort of, you know, I thought it was the right thing to do. But that's not the way book companies see it. When you're not involved in it, they don't want your name on it.
Howard, at 156 spots, it isn't particularly a popular press book. Who might be the purchasers of a third edition text like this? So what's the market?
Yeah, the market. Well, the market, that's interesting because the company wouldn't be redoing it if it wasn't a good market. They don't tell you all the details, you know, about what the market is. But the fact that it's selling so well, and the fact that I'm becoming such a wealthy man, the market is pretty good. Every veterinary college uses this book. And in this country, there are 32 veterinary colleges. There are 4 in Canada. And in the English-speaking world, the British use our books. And in a lot of foreign countries, our books are used in English. So I would say that the market is mostly veterinary students and practitioners, And then in places where they have research going on where they use dogs, they've got to know these fine points of arteries, nerves, etc. And you know, you can get general illustrations that are general things, but that's not what they need when they're doing research. They need to know exactly what it is that goes where. So I don't really know everybody that buys it, but it sells very well. Yes.
What did the veterinary students use as a reference before the first edition came out?
Yeah, that's a good question. Ellenberger and Baum is a German book about that thick, and it was published in Germany. There was the most authoritative veterinary anatomy in the world, and the plates were bombed out, destroyed completely. So all the plates were destroyed, and they never did it again. So I would say the students, some used that book, and they had a couple of not really translations. There weren't any real translations. Everybody had their own guides. Dr. Miller had a guide also to the dissection of the dog, published by Ann Arbor, you know, the Ann Arbor Press. And every college had handouts that they would use. So it was really a hit or miss thing all over the country. Yes? Can wildlife biologists use it, you say? Oh, yes. Yeah, it's probably used in ways that we don't even know, you know, that I wouldn't imagine. Whoever needs information on the dog, the details, this is what they have to use.
When you were saying that there was a lot of crossbreeding among all of the dog-related animals, when and how did it get slowed down to focus on specific breeds that are recognizable as...
Yeah. That took place in countries that had kennel clubs, like what they say AKC, that's the American Kennel Club. And the American Kennel Club registers the breed. If a group of people that are interested in those dogs are breeding a particular kind of dog, they apply to the American Kennel Club, AKC, and they have a formal process of application, which goes through a number of years. They want to know how many people are breeding that dog and different details like that. So if a breed is recognized, then it goes into this book. And over the years, the number of breeds have been increasing. Right now we have, I think, 375 breeds. And if you want to establish a new breed, it's up to the people who breed those dogs. If you're a breeder of a certain kind of dog, you can apply to have that dog become a registered dog. And there are certain rules you have to follow, and in 2 or 3 years, it'll be accepted. Now, the British have another system. So what they consider in one breed, group, we put in another group. And that's the way it is. I mean, it's up to the people who have the groups, what they want to call it. And occasionally they switch a dog from one group to another. You know, they've moved some dogs around.
How many generations of a new breed before you can call it a, quote, purebred? And is there such a thing as a purebred dog?
I don't think technically there's nothing that's a purebred, really. But it only takes one generation to get, I mean, you make a cross, and if you keep making that same cross, it's going to be a recognizable dog. Now, there's some very interesting pictures that Stockard made. The Stockard, as I said, was an MD at the Cornell Medical School. And in 1971, he established a dog colony in Peekskill, New York. And he bought purebred dogs from various breeders and started crossing them in a way that he knew everything about it, you know, and the back crosses. So he has the most direct records of crosses, and very few people use his book anymore. Unfortunately, Stockard died before he was able to publish that book. So it was published by the Wistar Institute, which is in Philadelphia, and it contains information that's still useful today because he was so careful with everything he did. And he saved the skeletons of every dog that died in his colony. So he has the skeletons of F1 generations, F2 generations. He has pictures of them before. He has histological slides of the pituitary. Stockard got so that he could recognize breeds by looking at the pituitary gland histologically. So it's really amazing what you can do when you look at these things. This collection, by the way, which was in Philadelphia, the Wistar Institute became something quite different from what Caspar Wistar thought it was when he gave the whole collection to them. And the collection there is now in the University of Georgia Museum by some quirk. So if you want to see it, that's where it is. Oh, my chart. Yeah, what did I do with that chart? Oh, over here. I have a chart here that shows the way they printed this book. Eric and I went down to the printing house. This is one signature. They call this a signature. And what it has, all of these pages, if you read the numbers, they jump around, you know. It seems crazy. What they do is they print the pages, and then they have a machine that folds it and cuts it. So that, you know, this is page 300 and something, and this is page 128, and I don't know the system. It's really a topology problem. And what this is one sheet that came out of the press. We went down to Cherry Hill, Pennsylvania, where Saunders had their printing plant, and these things come flying off the end, and they make a pile like this at the end, and a forklift truck goes over and grabs this pile. It's got, you know, big fingers at the end, grabs this whole pile and turns it over and goes down to the end of the printing presses and puts it in again. So that it goes through and it gets a whole set of prints like that, another signature on the other side. And it's just fantastic when you think that they can fold that up. If you look at the numbers on it, they fold it up and the numbers on the other side and this side, and when they cut it, it's just right. It's almost, I couldn't get over it really. And then what happens is when they try to make a few red and blues. So they made some with color. And to do color, you could only print one color at a time. So this forklift truck would come down and grab this whole pile of paper and go down the other end and send it through for the blue. And the blue would be one little figure on the page. Then they would send it through for the red. And when they go through, if the paper stretches a little, then they're not in register. So the red and the blue, you know, are in the wrong places, and they have to discard the whole thing. There was a pile of paper over to the side of this printing press. I couldn't believe it. Almost as many as were bad that were good. So it was very expensive to do it like that, the register. And then some books they even bound with some plates that weren't in register, thinking that maybe people wouldn't look at those, you know. I don't know what they thought, but they got a lot of complaints. And, of course, as soon as they'd send a book back that wasn't in register, they'd have to replace it with another one. That was a very expensive thing. So printing changed just in time to keep this from being a disaster. That's why we have so many color books now. Yeah. Yes?
Did they ask you whether you'd be interested in an electronic version as well? An e-version of the textbook?
An e-version? No, they never ask because they can do it without asking. You know, they have the right to do it. You sign so many papers, you know, because you want to have the book published. So I didn't object to anything that they wanted to do. I should have objected to reductions in size like they did. I made a lot of fuss about that, and some pictures they enlarged. But, you know, they begged that they can't afford to do certain things, and you have to be practical about it. It's probably on ebook already. You know, I wouldn't be surprised. Is it? Oh, you have the ebook? Okay. Yeah. That's where the royalties disappear. Yeah, most authors don't make any money on books. You know, it's a very rare thing where the authors make some money on the books.
Would you comment on the believed spine of the German Shepherd? So many German Shepherds seems to have problems with the rear legs. And I want to know if you have a comment about the anatomy or the spine or...
No, every German Shepherd I've looked at has a fine spine, and I see no problem with it. These are things that are very difficult to assess, really. It's more a physiological thing than it is anatomical. And now there are some conditions where things are passed along, but not at all clearly. I mean, there are many conditions where you don't see them being passed along. I really can't answer that question. It's one of those questions that's asked frequently, but there's no easy answer. You know, if you know, for instance, there are things, I know some dogs that are losing some muscles. The muscles just don't show up anymore. The dachshund is losing the stylomastoideus. Nobody knows what the dog uses it for. It's supposed to be a help in hearing, but they're hearing just fine, the ones with this reduced muscle. So there are cases where muscles are lost, or maybe another muscle comes in by a split of others, and we don't really know. That hasn't been studied to such a degree that we can say.
When you're speaking about the dachshund, isn't the dachshund the breed that was originally bred to be a badger hunter, so they could go down in
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, a lot of dogs were bred for what they were, rat killers, you know, and to go down.
doing that anymore, they lose the
Yeah, if they're not, well, that's right. It's you wonder when they stop breeding for a certain thing, whether those conditions are passed on or not. They may well be passed on, even though they're not being used.
What about the dachshund's back? Isn't that considered to be a
It certainly seems to be a problem. Yeah, I remember when we had a dog here called Schnapsy. It was the dog of some TV luminary down in New York, and they managed to fix him up, and he walked with wheels on the back, you know. And Dr. Leonard got a case of champagne that he couldn't accept because you're not allowed to accept. No, I don't know of all these. There are lots of cases like this. I haven't dealt with the medical side of it. Yes.
Are you going to offer your class in the spring again?
Which one?
Natural history.
Oh, the natural history. Yeah, that was a very popular course, you know. I didn't know how popular it was until I stopped it.
You promised
And
to come back.
yeah, well, it was a lot of fun. I like natural history, and this was a really good opportunity to do it. You know, who knows? If urged, I might do it again. My wife's shaking her head no.
You have I guess, an incredible reputation in your abilities to dissect. Do you have any stories that you'd like to share with us about different critters you've dissected or anything like that?
Yeah. No, I can't say. You know, dissection is a thing that you get better at as you do more of it. And I learned the techniques from people I was in Stimson Hall. You know, I went, as an undergraduate, I went through zoology in Stimson Hall, and there was a professor there by the name of Dr. Papes. He was in the medical school. He was a neurologist in the medical school. And one day they came to him in 1939, and they said, Dr. Papes, the medical school is moving to New York. Would you like an outside window, inside window? I don't know what to ask him. He said, I don't want any windows. I'm staying right here. He said, Dr. Papes, the school is moving. He said, well, the school may be moving, but not I. So they didn't know what to do. They say, you know, leave him alone for a year. He'll come around. Leave him be. So at the end of the year, they went to him, Dr. Papes, you know, we're moving next year. And they'd already started to move, actually. And he said, well, very good, but they said, we can't keep you here. We don't have a job for you. He said, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. So what did Dr. Papes do? He came up to the College of Home Economics, and he told the dean in the College of Home Economics that what the people needed in home economics was a course on the evolution and origin of people and animals, sort of overall course in biology of animals. And the dean in home economics said, fine. So Papes, next thing I knew, and he could keep his graduate students. So he had very good graduate students in neurology. He kept the graduate students in neurology. He had a technician that had come from Germany that was particularly good at staining nerve cells. You know, it's a very hard thing to do. And so Papes just continued on, and he was an interesting guy. You could go into him and ask about the brain of a coral fish, and he'd be able to draw a picture of where the fibers go, of why a coral fish erects its dorsal spines. He could trace, you know, he just knew all these sorts of things. So he and the what?
Dissecting the penguin on the bar of the cruise ship.
Oh yeah, penguin. Oh, I dissect. Oh, that, yeah. Bars are very good places to dissect animals because they're usually stainless steel and they're at the right height, you know. You don't have to bend over all the time. They're up about like this so you can see what you're doing. And we found on these cruise ships that the bars were the best place to hold demonstrations. So, yeah, I miss those places. Yes. Well, yeah, I went to China, and China asked me to demonstrate various anatomical techniques. And I have a technique where you can inflate the chicken if it has an egg all the way down in the uterus, in the shell gland. You can feel the egg. And the idea is really something. You put the chicken on its back, and you put the air tube in the trachea, and give it a little shot of air, and it'll lay the egg. You tell everybody, keep your eye on the ball, you know, on the egg. And and sure enough, you know, it worked. So when I went to China, well, first thing I didn't know, they had 220 in every outlet. So when I gave the chicken the electrocution, the chicken went up in the air about that high. And, you know, normally the chicken is just pretty close to the table. But this bigger shock, it's a great way to put an animal out. There's no pain involved. And then I thought, oh, that was at Tufts where that happened, the blow up, yeah. In Tufts, I used to go to Tufts when they first started out, and the bird anatomy was their first course of study, and they were using the old medical school facility. And so I wanted to do this demonstration for them, and I told everybody, gather around the table, you know, and I had everybody close around the table, and I put the, I went with a can of Barbasol because I found that shaving cream would act just like air, you know. And I could keep talking. I could say, well, see this, look at that, and everything. And I gave it one little push, and that one little push, this chicken exploded. And everybody around the table had Barbasol shaving cream with blood on it. And I was going around, sorry. Oh. And to this day, I meet people at different meetings, and the only thing they remember is that chicken blowing up. So it did have an effect. Well, I thank you for your attention, and you're welcome to look at anything I have here.
This has been a production of Cornell University. On the web at cornell.edu.